All right, here we go.
Yeah.
So Maggie asked, what is the flanker task? Well, let's take a look. All right. So if you guys look in my screen, I don't know if somebody can make me like the main screen or whatever, but flanker task is basically a way of testing what's called attentional control, which is the ability to pay attention to some things while ignoring other things. So here we go. It's an old slideshow from 2018, but you see the arrows in the bottom of the screen here? That represents the flanker task. So you're sitting in front of the computer and you see arrows appear, and there's like 5 arrows. So we call that the array. And they're either pointing the same direction, which would be called a congruent trial, or the middle arrow is pointing the opposite direction, and that's called an incongruent trial. So your job is to indicate whether the center arrow is facing to the left or the right. So which one do you guys think is harder, the congruent trials or the incongruent trials? Of course, it's the incongruent trials are harder, right? There's flanker tasks that you can. Oh yeah, so here's an example with letters, and then this is with arrows. So the top would be an incongruent trial, and the bottom would be a congruent trial. So consistently, everybody takes longer with the incongruent trials than the congruent trials because your brain wants to think, oh, the arrows are all pointing the same direction. But then you have to stop and be like, no, actually the center arrow is pointing the opposite direction. And that takes time. So it actually takes you longer to respond to an incongruent trial than a congruent trial. And this is true for everybody. And also, you're less accurate responding to incongruent trials than congruent trials. Yeah, that's another one. All right. Should I just get started with the presentation?
Char, you're muted. I think he's talking, but
I think it would be a good idea to switch to Zoom so that it makes it easier. Can you share your screen to present?
Honestly, I think it's a problem with my computer. It's on its last legs. So I think this is the best method.
Okay. Can you send me the presentation and I share it?
Sure.
Oh, I was gonna offer to do it.
I'll just share it with Dr. Char here.
All right.
Is Mr. Creem pinned for all of you? Yes, good. Okay. And he's going to send me.
Do you guys have the paper available? Like, you guys all have the paper up so we can refer to it? Good, good. All right, so let me just get into like the story of how this research came about. We'll use the slides sparingly, but I just wanted to start off by explaining like where this idea came from. You can go to the next slide, Dr. Char. I put this in here. You can hit next. This is supposed to demonstrate something about what grabs your attention, right? So in psychology, there's a well-demonstrated fact that novel things get your attention. So stuff that's weird, stuff that you haven't seen before is very attention-grabbing. But that's not always convenient. Sometimes we have to pay attention to something that is not novel. Like when you're doing your homework, you might not find it extremely interesting, but you have to find ways to focus your attention on it. Which brings me to a point I wanted to make, which is that I think this research actually feels more relevant now than it did when we first did it. In 2025, smartphones and social media have gotten a lot more prevalent, and it seems like so have attention spans gotten shorter. And we live in what's called an attention economy, where everybody is trying to get your attention. Every TikToker is trying to get your attention so that they can sell you stuff. Every company is trying to get you to pay attention to something. And that's like what the modern economy is built off of. And as a result, people have less ability to focus their own attention on something. So attention issues has become like very commonplace now. So I think research into ways to improve people's attention or improve people's ability to pay attention to what they want to is more important now than ever. Any questions so far? All right, we can go to the next one. Some important research tips. I mean, we can kind of skip over this. You guys pretty much know this, unless if Dr. Char, I think it's important, but yeah. Motivation, I don't know why this is in here.
Okay.
Honestly. Yeah, so I went to Swarthmore, as did Dr. Char. This presentation, by the way, I put together for some students at Crosby back in 2018. So I don't really remember too much about it, but all right, we can go to the next one.
Oops.
All right, so why is attention important? This is kind of like I mentioned, not only, I mean, it's obviously implicated in disorders like ADD, ADHD, also possibly OCD. There's some research indicating that OCD has to do with attention deficits. Pain management can be helped with attention training. And then, what did I say? Yeah, we can skip that. Okay, next. Yeah, so I wanted you guys to try and exercise with defining, like coming up with your own definition of attention. So why don't you guys all take a minute and try to write in the chat, what do you think attention even is? How would you define it? Can everybody do that? Take a minute and just try to write your own definition of attention in the chat. We do have a chat, right?
So anybody, there we go. The ability to try to understand, relate, and learn from something, understanding how it works. That's an interesting definition. Okay.
Okay. So yeah, like pretty much what I expected. I expected pretty much everybody to use the word focus in their definition, because it's synonymous, really. So good job, everybody, not using the word attention to define attention.
Yes.
That's good. But focus is really just synonymous with attention. So I don't think it really gets us very far in understanding what attention is. I mean, it's kind of an analogy, right? If you think of focusing, where does that term come from? It comes from like camera lenses, how we can focus light on an object. And that's kind of an analogy for attention, and it can help a little bit, but I don't think it really helps us understand what it is. So Dr. Char, would you share the slideshow again?
Yep.
William James is one of the most famous psychologists ever. He's considered the father of modern psychology. And actually, I have his textbook here, The Principles of Psychology, in 2 volumes, which I was awarded this book for this thesis research that we did here. But William James couldn't even come up with a good definition of intelligence. So basically, I mean, not intelligence, attention. So in the description here, he just says, everyone knows what attention is. It is the taking possession of by the mind in clear and vivid form of one out of what seems several simultaneously possible objects or trains of thought. Focalization, concentration of consciousness are of its essence. So he's giving a description, but I still think it's very vague. It's not a real good explanation of attention, and it certainly doesn't explain it in terms of the brain at all. So that's what we're starting with. And I honestly say I would think that our neuroscience of attention hasn't even progressed all that far either. Although we'll see that Posner and others have learned a few things. All right, we can move on to the next one.
Can I add one thing? This
Yeah,
because
go
I
ahead.
think this is crazy. William James is the brother of Henry James, the famous author.
Yeah.
So imagine that those parents and how proud they are of their children. Holy crap! That William James, founder of psychology, Henry James, one of the greatest writers in the English tome.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's basically just saying like it's not really a clear description.
Yeah.
So from a science of attention, yeah. So I'm putting in here that like the best way I can try to explain attention from a like brain standpoint is that your brain has only so much energy, and so it can only do so many things at one time. So attention is basically, in simple terms, we can think of attention as how your brain is allocating energy. And obviously you can only really pay attention to one or a couple of things at a time. Does that make sense? So a lot of people, they try to multitask and do a bunch of different things at once, but the more things you try to do at once, the worse you're going to do them. So one of the things I recommend to my students a lot is just try to do one thing well at a time. Don't try to really multitask. It's kind of impossible because, again, your brain is kind of like a computer that only has so much processing power. So you can only allocate so much attention at a time to anything. Questions, Dr. Char, do you have any specific details on that? I'm kind of just speaking in broad strokes here.
I'm interested to hear how much the neurotransmitters play into this from that perspective, because if I were defining attention, when I talk about attention in my neuro classes, I kind of talk about it as two completely different things. One is a threat assessment, and that's one specific neurotransmitter, dopamine, and the other one is the actual focus that you're talking about, and to me that's norepinephrine. So and at least on the dopamine side, Knudsen and Posner, they kind of did a lot of that work.
Yeah.
And Carl Zimmer is my favorite science writer, so I keep seeing things in here that I'm like, oh, look at that. Oh, yeah.
So Posner, I don't know if I have a slide here on Posner or not, but Posner basically and his students and colleagues come up with a 3 attention networks theory. So it might be on the next slide. Yeah. So in terms of neuroanatomy, there's this region of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC for short. That's been shown to be really important in attention tasks like the flanker test. The ERP, we'll get to that later. But where's the 3 attention networks? So basically, I'll just say there's thought to be, or at least Posner and his colleagues think there's 3 main attention networks. There's the alerting response, which is what Dr. Char talked about, like kind of a survival thing, where something like wakes you up. So you hear a loud bang, and all of a sudden you're like ready to respond. That's the alerting response. The second network is called the orienting network, and that's orienting you toward a specific location. So this would be like somebody calls your name from a corner of the room and you turn to that corner of the room. But it's not necessarily even turning physically or looking physically. Your attention can be directed just mentally. For instance, you can listen selectively to a sound coming from some specific location. So that's the orienting response, is orienting your attention to a specific location. And then the third network is called the executive network. And that's where you really have to ignore irrelevant stimuli and focus on something that you choose to. So that's more like the conscious attention, where you're deciding that you're going to focus on one thing while ignoring distractors. So that's the framework that we kind of worked in. It's been criticized, especially in recent years, but there's the alerting response, there's the orienting response, and there's the executive network. And there are thought to be 3 separate brain networks underlying this. What do we mean by a brain network? Can anybody guess that? What is a network in the brain? Do we have any takers? I can't really see.
Doesn't look like it.
Dr. Char, how would you describe a brain network?
Cells connected to each other that are doing cellular or multicellular processing. So they're actually doing almost like digital processing cell by cell. Eve Marder's work. So Nobel Prize season is coming up, and I'm rooting for Eve Marder for that exact thing, neural networks, and she did somatogastric ganglia. But if you have a cell, actually a receptor is even easier to describe. A receptor can be on or off. Okay, cool. So you can get 2 bits of information, right? But if you have another receptor next to it, it could be on or off. So you could have like 2 on, 2 off. One's on, one's off. The other one's on, the other one's off. And so you add these up, and you can think of neurons doing the same thing. Neurons are kind of doing the first level of processing about whether or not they're going to send the signal to the next neuron. And then within the network works together to kind of send the signal further.
Yeah. So a network implies the idea of multiple things that are connected, right? So neurons, it's all about communicating one neuron to the next, or one neuron might send a signal to thousands of other neurons. So a neural network is the idea that there's, a certain number of neurons that go together, or more often in like this sort of research, we think about regions of the brain that have very strong connections to each other. So there's something called like the default mode network. That's considered to be the network that's active when you're not doing anything in particular. When you're just kind of sitting there, your default mode network is active. So there's this theory of 3 separate attention networks: one network for alerting, one for orienting, and one for executive control. There's also the dopamine network, and is that the same as the alerting network, Dr. Char, or is that?
Yeah, dopamine is kind of the novelty of the attention. So is it the thing that you are now attending to? This is dopamine. Is the thing you're attending to something new that you need to do a threat assessment on? Is it safe? Is it interesting? Right? And that's really very right-brained. So you actually, it's literally the right side of your brain that's doing the processing. And then the left side of the brain is really more the attending to things that are benign, that you've already been already done a threat assessment on. Yeah.
All right, cool. So that's the overview of the neuroscience for now. What else do we got? So next, I think it starts talking about meditation. So this research project was my idea. It actually started when I was a student at Holy Cross, because I kind of got into meditation in middle school for anxiety reasons. So a psychologist actually recommended it to me and showed me how to meditate. But in high school, I had a friend who was also into meditation, and we would do it a lot before cross-country races or track races to kind of calm the nerves. But I really thought that it helped improve performance. And there was a book, which is on the next slide, this book that I read that described meditation as essentially training attention. So training yourself to pay attention to just one thing, and that's what meditation is. So you can meditate on anything by just paying attention to choosing to pay attention to one thing, such as your breath or the feeling in your palm of your hand, for example. That's his definition of meditation. So that gave me the idea that, I wonder if meditation is could improve people's attention over time. Yeah, all right, we can go to the next one. So in 2014, I was taking a research methods class in psychology, and we had to design an experiment. And I convinced my partner to try this experiment where we would just bring people into the psych lab, and we would either give them a meditation to do, or we'd give them a control condition. You guys know what a control is, right? That's the group that doesn't get the experimental treatment. And we compare how they do on an intention task. So we had to do some research. We can go to the next slide. So this is where the flanker task comes in. That was our operational definition of attention. You know, we now know, like I now know that there's much more to attention than just this. But at the time, I'm a sophomore in college. I find this flanker test that supposedly measures this attention, and we decided to just go with it. Specifically, though, this flanker test would be measuring the executive attention. So it's not measuring the alerting or the orienting. It's measuring the executive control, because you have to pay attention to just the center arrow and ignore the ones on the side. So the procedure is pretty simple. We bring participants into the lab. We give them either a meditation tape, so a 10-minute tape where they listen to instructions on how to meditate, or we give them a control tape, which is the same person, the same amount of time. It's a 10-minute tape, so the same person is speaking for the exact same amount of time. She's using the same tone of voice. She's making all the same pauses. But instead of giving directions like pay attention to your breathing, notice all the sensations in your body, she's just reading a National Geographic article about giant sequoias. That was the control tape. And we actually got this tape from my professor's friend at Yale named Hetty Kober. She's in the Yale psychology department, and her research focuses on smoking cessation. So she has done a lot of studies trying to see if you can use meditation to help people quit smoking, which would be interesting to read up on. But anyway, so she made the tapes and we just borrowed them. One important thing to remember is that we actually had people wear a blindfold during the meditation, because we wanted to make sure that they kept their eyes closed. So for both conditions, we had them blindfolded in the meditation and the control condition. That might become a problem later on. And then we had them do the flanker task, and then we gave them a personality survey afterwards, because the professor that I worked with, Catherine Norris, is a social neuroscience. So she does a lot of research with personality. So can we go to the next slide?
Sure.
Did I have to talk about personality? No, so this is just this is just examples of the flanker test. There's links there if anybody, I don't know if you, Dr. Char, want to click the links, do you think, or no? One shows the flanker test, another one shows the Stroop test, which is kind of the same thing, very similar. Does anybody want to see them, or should we move on?
I clicked it and it didn't share it on the screen. So
all right.
I can share
I kind of
it.
remember it, so I think they know.
Okay.
Let me just get my phone charger here really quick.
Okay.
Have any of you guys ever done the Stroop test? Where you have to like read words that are in different colors, but you have to ignore the color and just read the word. Or sometimes you have to ignore the word and just read the color. It's pretty difficult, but it's very much like the flanker task. It involves having to ignore stuff and pay attention to other stuff.
Did you have to program?
Yes,
the flanker task or sec?
Yeah, so there's a software called ePrime, which is common in psych research, and you can just program like stimuli and what responses. So people just at a keyboard have to use, I think it was F for left and J for right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I programmed it.
I had a friend, Chris Asplund, who did his PhD in this, and he would program in MATLAB. And one time he was showing a series of images with distractors, and my face was a distractor in the middle of a bunch of numbers.
Yeah.
So, but it was so fast. People were like, they saw it, but they weren't sure who it was. And yeah.
So my Professor Norris wanted to do this study with faces at one point. Mm-hmm. She wanted to do like a third study where instead of looking at instead of arrows, it was faces. And they would have different emotions. So she wanted to see if like an angry face would change it. But it just got too complicated. The amount of variables was insane, and like the sample size was not big enough to deal with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can go to the next thing. Okay, this is a link to the tapes, which we don't need to listen to. You guys can take my word for it. Okay. Individual differences. So yeah, the personality survey we used is called the Big Five, which is, I think it's still considered kind of the gold standard of personality research, right?
Yes.
So the way to remember the Big Five that I learned is OCEAN. So there's 5 traits: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So basically, there's different versions of the survey. There's short versions and there's long versions. But this is just an example of some questions that you might see on there. Is like, how active are you? How agreeable? Like, so you rank. It's a personality survey essentially, but it's pretty reliable. Like, people tend to have. When I say reliable, it means that if you score a certain way at one time, you're likely to score very similarly at another time. It's not likely to change based on how you feel that day. Is that about right with that, Dr. Char?
Yeah, unlike the MBTI, which some people will slightly change based on how they feel, which is why it's less accurate. Yeah.
Which is
Yeah,
which was invented by Swatis.
Yes, it was. That's right. Yeah, Briggs Myers, right. Yeah, Big Five is the best that we have, and even then, it still only explains something like 20% of your behavior. So
Yeah,
of the
I mean,
variation in behavior, yeah.
you have to take it with a grain of salt. And survey data, I mean, one of the things that I learned in research methods is that survey data is one of the least reliable forms of data that you can use. Because, like, how often is asking somebody about their behavior going to give you true insight into your behavior? Like, you ever have somebody do something and you're just like, why'd you do that? And can they really explain why they did something? So asking people about themselves is not the best way to gather data. It's not the most reliable data that you can get. Okay, so the initial results on the flanker test, typically on the flanker test, you look at reaction times over accuracy. So incongruent trials are always less accurate and slower than congruent trials. Everybody's faster on the congruent trials and more accurate, right? But we're looking at a difference between the groups. So this graph, I would call on somebody, but I can't see everybody. Let's call on Juliana. Can you describe this graph for us?
So the control group and the median, the meditation things are being compared, congruent,
Yep.
like being the same testing, incongruent being different. And it looks like that for congruent, the accuracy for control is like a bit higher, whereas for incongruent, it seems to be higher in meditation.
Yeah, that's good description. Thank you, Juliana. So actually, if you look at the congruent trials only, remember, those are the easy trials, the difference between the control and meditation group is not significant. And I'm sure Dr. Char explained to you what significant means in statistics. So let me see if I'm going to pick on Dylan. Do you remember what statistical significance means?
Yeah, it kind of just means that it's like a relevant difference. Like, for example, the control and meditation groups, the congruent ones, they didn't really have that relevant of a difference, so can't really say that they're different.
Okay, yeah, relevant, I'll take that. But statistical significance is actually a mathematical concept. So there's tests that you do to determine if a difference is statistically significant or not. Like, for example, a t-test is like the most basic one, but there's a bunch of tests. Honestly, I don't remember exactly what tests we did here. I think it was t-tests. But the difference between the control and meditation group on the congruent trials is not statistically significant. So we would say that's not a real difference. Even though those bars look slightly different, they're not really different. It's just essentially due to randomness, right? However, if we look at the incongruent trials, that is a significant difference. So the difference between the control group and the meditation group on the incongruent trials is significant. So in other words, the people who meditated had significantly better accuracy than the control group on the incongruent trials only. Questions? Dr. Char, questions?
No, it makes sense to me.
We did do I think an ANOVA, or we did a test to see if the interaction was significant first. So just so you don't think that we were p-hacking and running a bunch of t-tests. The first thing, so the proper way to do this, and my stats are a bit rusty, but the proper way to do this is first you test for an interaction, because we actually have two independent variables. So the first independent variable would be whether you're in a meditation group or a control group. What would be the second independent variable here? I'm going to pick on Dom. What do you think is the second independent variable in this experiment? Your mic's off, Tom.
Could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, so we had to test for an interaction because there's actually two independent variables in this experiment. The first independent variable is whether you're in a meditation group or the control group. What do you think is the second independent variable? Looking at the
If
graph.
it's, like, congruent or incongruent?
That's right, if the trial is congruent or incongruent. Right. So because there's two independent variables, you do a statistical test for what's called an interaction between those variables. And that did come out significant. Very good, Dom.
It did.
All right, any other questions?
Wait, it did. The
The
interaction.
Yeah, it was significant. Yeah. I'm pretty sure.
Missed it. Well, that's cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. But it actually gets cooler, believe it or not. On the next slide.
Hold on. Wait. So, guys, an interaction means that there's only a difference in certain circumstances, as opposed to there's just a difference all the time, or there is something that changes, but it always changes for both groups. It's that like one group, which is so congruent, doesn't change, but the incongruent does change dependent on whether or not it's a control or meditation. And that means experience has an effect on the accuracy.
Yeah.
And so that's very cool. Cool. All right. We'll skip that.
Okay, so moving on to the next slide. Are we there?
Yeah. What individual differences? You want to skip that, or you want to go to?
Yeah, no. This is actually also cool. So we did test to see if any of the personality factors affect the accuracy here, and none of them did except for neuroticism. So I'm gonna pick on Chris. What do you think, if you had to guess, what is neuroticism? What does that mean?
I have absolutely no clue.
Okay, how about Maria? If you had to guess what neuroticism is.
I also have no clue.
Okay, fine. Neuroticism is basically nervousness or a tendency to worry or anxiousness, we could say. So
pretty much
neurotic
all of you
people-
people.
Yeah, neurotic people tend to be good students a lot of the time. But neuroticism is like how much you tend to worry or get anxious about stuff. So the interesting thing about this is that if we look at, I know this graph, it's a scatter plot, but we have the three groups separated with different colored dots. So the blue dots is the control group, the green dots is the meditation group. And we actually went back later and did a no-tape group, and those are the orange dots. And we see that neuroticism affects the accuracy to incongruent trials only in the meditation group, but not in the other two groups. And this is a statistically significant difference. Actually, it may be marginally significant, but it's at least close to significant.
Point 2 is pretty strong.
Yeah, I don't know what
and I kind of see it. Like, guys, can you see my mouse moving? Hold on.
Yeah, so the green line is going down,
Right
which means
here.
that the more neurotic people were, the less accurate they were even after meditating. Whereas the people who have low neuroticism, when they meditated, they were extremely accurate. So we basically say that the people who are less neurotic saw a big benefit from meditation, and the people who are more neurotic did not see a benefit from meditation.
So the people who need it the most are probably the ones who are most neurotic, right?
Yeah, and it did not help them, really, unfortunately.
Sorry, guys, but you're all screwed now.
No, I wouldn't think that way. Maybe you just need more than one. Another important thing about this study is that most of the people, almost everybody who came in and did the experiment, had almost no experience with meditation. So one of the reasons that we were able to get this study published is that most published research on meditation looks at people doing weeks or months of training, whereas this was just looking at a one-shot meditation with people who had essentially no experience. So it may be the case that neurotic people just need more practice.
Who were your participants?
Just students. So in this first study, It was just whoever we could get in, because this was actually like a pilot study in a class. So this study was done for research methods class at Swarthmore. But then we did a follow-up study. So there's a second study that was like bigger and more legitimate, where we had to get it passed by the IRB. And that one we brought in people, mostly students, but like, you know, they got paid.
Cool.
All right. I realize we're kind of dragging, so maybe what time do we want to be done? 9?
Yeah.
All right, so let me try to rush through the second study, and then we'll have some time for questions.
Okay.
All right, so can we go to part 2?
Yep.
All right, so I have here the ANT is the flanker test on steroids. I don't know if Dr. Char can show the demo by clicking on the link, but the ANT is designed, it's created by Posner's team, Michael Posner's team, and it's supposed to test all 3 attention networks at once. So it's supposed to test the alerting network, the orienting network, and the executive network. We were really only interested in the executive network, but we decided to use this attention network test because, number one, a lot of other people use it, so we can compare our results to other people's. Number 2, we figured, well, maybe we will see a difference in the alerting and executive responses, or the alerting and the orienting responses, even though we were mainly thinking we'd see a difference in the executive responses. Any questions there? All right, the other thing that we did differently with this study is we actually recorded EEG and ERPs. So you guys see the picture there of the guy with the net on his head? That's a participant in our study, and the young woman hooking him up to the machine is one of our research assistants. And I actually had to like train everybody on how to do this. I had to learn how to do it myself and then train everybody. But EEG is called electroencephalography, and it's a way of recording the electrical activity of the brain through your skull. So if we go to the next slide, we call these brain waves. Maybe some of you have heard of them or seen it on like a medical show or something like that, but this is what a raw EEG looks like. So each of those squiggly lines represents a different electrode on the scalp, and we can just record that. Mainly, EEG is used to detect things like seizures, or like if the doctor suspects you have a brain tumor, they'll send you in to get an EEG to check if there's any like damage to your brain. It's a relatively cheap way of checking your brain function. Dr. Char, anything to add on EEGs?
I had one recently.
How was it?
Boring. I almost fell asleep. It's very boring. Yeah.
It's interesting because, yeah, a lot of times, so the participants in these studies would sometimes fall asleep because the experiments can get kind of boring. And we would also, you could actually see when somebody was falling asleep because of what's called alpha waves in the EEG. So you would start to see the brain waves like getting more of a consistent sine wave pattern, and that's called alpha activity, and it indicates that the person is falling asleep.
Yeah, they told me I did fall asleep, and I was like, but I didn't. But I knew what they were talking about because I must have been in N1 alpha sleep, and just you're still sort of aware of it. Yeah. Next.
Yeah. There's a lot of other things about EEG that I'm not going to get into, but one thing that, like, when I was reading up on the literature for this, I would sometimes come across the you guys see on the right, there's like beta, alpha, theta, and delta. Some research has shown that people in deep meditation have an increase in is it theta? I think it's theta waves.
Yeah.
But it actually might even be a different type. But there is like, they have done EEGs on people while they're meditating. And we didn't really look at that in this study, but we did record it while they were meditating to see if we could, like, we were thinking about analyzing it down the road, and I never did that. Dom, go ahead.
So what are like the beta and like where did these names come from? Like,
oh, they're Greek letters.
Beta.
So, you know, in the Greek alphabet, you've got alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. Those are the first 4 letters of the Greek alphabet. We'll actually be talking about this soon in chemistry with types of radiation. But yeah, they're just named, but like alpha was probably discovered first. That's why it gets A. And beta was probably second. That's why it gets B.
So there's no like significance of why they specifically named like alert working as beta or like relax and reflecting as alpha. No.
No, typically when they name, I'm at least I'm pretty sure not. When they name something alpha, beta, gamma, that's usually just like the order that was discovered in. It's just ABC. You know.
Okay.
All right, so the raw EEG wasn't really what we were looking for. We can go to the next slide. What we were looking at, and this is because Swarthmore's lab kind of focused on this type of research, was called ERP, or event-related potential. Are we on this slide with number 16?
Yep.
Yeah, so an event-related potential is a pretty cool type of analysis. You take the raw EEG, and you can actually teach the computer, not teach, but program the computer to snip the EEG when you present a stimulus, and then you record for like a second after the stimulus, and you look at what the brain does in that 1 second after the stimulus. And then you average that across all the trials within a person, and then you average that across all the people in the condition. So for example, if we're looking at a response to the incongruent flanker task, we would start the ERP when they see the flanker and record for about a second after that. And we'd average that across all the incongruent trials for a subject, and then average that for all the subjects in the meditation condition, and the same for the control condition. So that's what this is. It's essentially snipping the EEG and averaging it a lot. And you start to see these patterns. So that's what an ERP is. And we can talk about different components of the ERP. So the ones going up, those are called positives. The ones going down, those are called negatives. And they're just named they're named for where they peak. So for example, an N200 is a negative component peaking at around 200 milliseconds after the stimulus. And a P300 is a positive component peaking around 300 milliseconds after the stimulus. Questions, comments, concerns? All right, we're going rapid fire. On the next slide, showing some results. This is probably the most interesting result from the study, is that it kind of replicates the results of the first study, except that we see a difference in reaction time instead of accuracy. So rather than how many they got right, we're looking at how long it took them to respond. So again, in the control group, and I think this is only to the incongruent trials, in the control group, we see there's a difference. Well, how do we interpret this? Okay, so this is looking at people in neuroticism, people with low neuroticism on the left and people with high neuroticism on the right. And if we look at the difference between the control and meditation groups, there's a significant difference for people low in neuroticism, but a not significant difference for people high in neuroticism. So this is, again, just showing that people with high neuroticism don't really see an effect of meditation. So that was replicating from the first study to the second study. Any questions there? All right. I don't know if we need to go through the rest of the slides. So just to summarize, I mean, I hope you guys got something out of the paper and the talk. Hopefully you get an idea for how psychology research works. Again, this is something that I just did in college, getting my bachelor's degree, and I kind of wish that I stuck with it, because it definitely could have been something that I pursued in grad school, and it'd be cool to get a PhD in this and become like an expert in attention research. But now this has been about 10 years since I did any work on this, so I'm a little bit rusty on it. So I want to have the last 10 minutes open for questions.
Did you see any?
Yes.
The numbers, yeah. The numbers, what were the numbers of participants, and were they fairly even in sex and demographics?
Yeah, so this is laid out in the paper. In study 1, it was like 19 and 18 in each condition. 19 in the meditation, 18 in the control. And we did do so we did test for that, and this is standard in psychology to make sure that there's no differences between your groups. So in the paper, you guys are looking at study 1 under results. the table 1 is showing that there's no differences in any of that. So there's actually almost a difference in age, where like in the meditation group, the average age was 19.22 years, and in the control tape they were a little bit older on average. That's almost a significant difference. But in the other, everything else we looked at, gender, race, and the big 5 personality traits and meditation experience, there was no significant difference between the groups. In the second study, I believe it was the same story, where there was no significant difference between the groups on anything prior to the meditation. Oh, on conscientiousness there was actually. So if we look at conscientiousness in the second study, the people in the meditation group were on average a little bit less conscientious than people in the control group.
So when you had this paper peer reviewed, sorry, I'm dominating this, guys. I want to ask these questions. When you had it peer reviewed, what was the criticism that stood out the most? Like, what do you think? What was the thing they thought was the weakest point?
To be honest, I don't remember.
Because I wonder if it might have been that. Because your average age is 19, and
Yeah.
you're using them as a model for how the brain works.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the problems in modern Western psychology, is the weird problem, right? I always have to look it up. I'm looking it up right now. Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. That's who we use. And it's almost always undergraduates that we're putting in these studies.
Right.
But if you think about the networks of neurons, a baby has 2,500 synapses per neuron. An adult like us, you and me, have 2,500 synapses per neuron, but everybody else in this discussion has about 10,000. So, and they're almost at that age. And so 19 years old, you still have a lot more. I wonder if when you get into your 20s, if all of a sudden things get way faster.
I don't know. It's a good question. But yeah, I mean, that is a criticism that can be made of a lot of psychology research, is that the subjects in the study are not representative of humans in general, right? Most psychology experiments are done primarily on college students who either are doing it for course credit or doing it for an extra $25, you know? So that's certainly a criticism you can make. Another thing I wanted to point out is that like the sample sizes in this study are not huge. I mean, in the second study, we had more. We tried to get, I think we tried to get 40 per group, but we ended up only having 29 in the meditation group and 27 in the control group. That's kind of small sample size to be trying to draw a big conclusion like meditation improves your attention. We only tested less than 60 people. I mean, with both studies combined, it was more like 100, but still. There's actually in the introduction, I'm sure you guys probably skipped parts of it, but in the introduction, it does talk about a lot of other studies, and two of them were very similar to ours. They did like almost the same procedure, and one of them found like no difference between the groups on the flanker test that they used. So this is another issue in psychology, and honestly in a lot of science, is that a lot of experiments, when you do the same experiment, like a different group does it, they get a different result. So this is called the replicability crisis. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but it's the idea that some group does a study, they find a result, but then if another group at a different university did the exact same study, they're likely to get a different result. We could get into the debate of like why that's the case, but I would not be surprised if somebody tried to replicate this experiment and didn't get the same result.
The most famous modern example of that is Claude Steele's work on stereotype threat.
Oh, I've got that book right here, actually.
Yeah. Claude Steele, in his lab at Stanford, he's been able to isolate this thing called stereotype threat, where people behave the way that a stereotype would expect them to.
Yeah.
When they're in the presence of the people who would stereotype them. So So girls are bad at math. Okay, so when girls are taking a math test with guys, they don't do very well in math. But if you isolate them and put them in a separate room, they do just as well. Okay, Claude Steele has been showered with awards for this work. Not a single one of his postdocs or graduate students who went and got faculty positions and did research to continue the research, not one of them has been able to replicate his work. And so, and that had, his work had profound impact on the way education is done.
Yeah,
it is
standardized testing.
as a scientist, it is not science if it is not replicable. And so he's come under massive fire. Why is it only in your lab that this thing happens? So yeah, that
Yeah.
and the
Mhm. And it's a big problem in a lot of social sciences. And it's not necessarily that you're manipulating the data. Like I can tell you, we didn't fudge the data in this experiment, but it might be due to randomness. Like you guys are familiar with the idea that like, okay, if you flip a coin 100 times, and you do that 100 coin flips 1,000 times, 1 out of 1,000 times, you're probably going to get something weird, like you'll flip heads 80%. You know, so just by random chance, sometimes you're going to get results that seem not random. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing is that maybe there's something that you're doing that is giving you the result in a way you didn't expect. And I just wanted to point that out in this experiment. I realized kind of late in the game that maybe it's not that meditation was helping people have better attention. Maybe it's that the control tape was putting people to sleep and making them have worse attention. Because think about it, in the control group, they're sitting there with a blindfold on, listening to somebody read an article about giant sequoias. They're probably falling asleep. Maybe the meditation was just a little bit more engaging, and that's why we ended up seeing a difference. So I actually went to my advisor and said, hey, we need to do a third condition where there's no treatment, no tape at all. And we did go back and do that, and it didn't affect our results much. We still saw meditation gave a little bit of a boost compared to no tape. But overall, we should have done that right from the get-go, right? We should have had a meditation tape, a control tape, and a no tape condition to see how people, to really try to parse it apart. So it's not always easy when you're doing research. Sometimes you make mistakes. Sometimes you say, oh, we need to redo the experiment. All right.
wow.
Last questions before we wrap up. Dr. Char's like, why was this published?
No.
There's so
kind of-
many things in psychology, Dr. Char, that get published that really shouldn't because they look
Yeah,
impressive.
but I actually think it's a little better than Frontiers would suggest.
Yeah.
I'm a little, maybe your advisor just wanted to get it published as fast as possible, but it's a good idea. It's a really interesting idea. But how funny that the neuroticism result by itself may actually, if the news had gotten wind of this study,
some news outlets did report on this study.
But did they report that part? Like, hey guys, you ever notice how the people who actually benefit from meditation are the ones who are already a little woo-woo and not neurotic at all? Like it's almost like a self-fulfilling thing, but you kind of isolated what exactly it was rather than just making an assumption.
Yeah. No, I don't think anybody reported on that, but we actually did get some news outlets picking up on it, and of course they reported it wrong. And I remember like writing an email to one of the journalists like, hey, you got this wrong, and he just never replied back to me.
Yeah, no, they don't. Yeah,
they don't care.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to an undergraduate getting a publication is a really, really big deal. I never got a publication with Kathy, so okay, well, it's 9:01. You guys don't have any questions. That's going to have to change for next time, but I do appreciate that you guys came because a lot of people did not, but we're going to do this more often, and I am taking attendance, so let's thank Mr. Creem.
I also appreciated the answers when I did call on you guys, and I'm sorry I wasn't better prepared for this talk. It's been an exhausting couple of weeks for me personally, but I hope you all got something out of it. And you can ask me your questions tomorrow in class. Double spaced 12-point Times New Roman font.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you. Let's thank Mr. Creem. Yay.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you. And
right.
that was a really good start to the year. Really
thank you.
interesting. Yeah. Really, that's a good article. So, okay. All right, fine. Warble, I'll agree with you. That was one of the better ones. Yeah. But for the rest of the time I know you, you're wrong.